We in the information age, but really what that means, it's oversaturated. Like podcasts in the rap scene, it's confusing. Whether you go in live or you zoom in, you ain't on the same page till you read what the room thinks, and the room thinks too many words, and every word is personal. When it's in type, it's even worse if you misunderstood. It's just how it works. So I'm a hypocrite just like the rest of the earths, and racists think you hate them, so they gotta hate you first. If there's a nation, there's a crime, the melting pot is the urn, they one is normal and ignorable, kindling to burn. Welcome to the Museum of Dead Words. I'm your tour guide, Dyalekt, alongside Pamela Capella, Kristen Crouch, and Andrew J. Scoville. We spent the last few years pouring through conversations online to find words that kill discussions and ruin discourse. We've dubbed these words dead and have been infiltrating art galleries, co-working spaces, cafes, and even universities to share how these words died and why that matters. In the online series, we'll be spending a week with each word, with Blueprints in Progress on Tuesdays, where we get deep into how a word dies, and on Thursdays, with the main event, as today will be a collaboration with artists from around the world to share their experiences with these words. If you know a word or phrase that has died or may be in danger, please share in the chat, add to the Dead Word bucket on museumofdeadwords.com, or DM me. I'm easy to find. I'm currently at the conference going on right now with Prosperity Now, the Prosperity Summit. A little about the museum. We opened when your mouth did, and thanks to the generous contribution of millions of donors like you, we've been able to identify and catalog a growing list of words in the English language that have fallen into disuse. You may be wondering why we wrote rhymes for the lines that died. You see, language comes from sound, and communication comes from the drum. So we use rhythm and tone to keep these words in check. You see, the reality is that words don't actually mean anything until we give them power by infusing them with tone and cadence. Fourth word in our museum is normal. It was born circa 1950 and died around the, circa 1500, and died around the 1980s when nerds took the stage and people realized there's profit to be found in niche markets. Normal came from math and tried to carry over these cold-hearted calculations, but the receipts just didn't add up. As I said on Blueprints in Progress, normal is often about safety, and in a zero-sum situation, safety for me tends to mean danger for you. We invited artists of different disciplines to jam with us and create their own impressions. And our next artist is pretty multifaceted. I'm just going to read their artist statement and then get into the work that they created. After a suburban childhood outside of Boston in 2003, I graduated from Vassar College and arrived in New York City ready for Broadway. With grainy black and white headshots, upwards of 2 audition songs, and a repertoire of male and or elderly roles, face of a cherubic toddler, and the voice of a brassy retiree. Naturally, I turned to comedy. Though my time at Vassar had not prepared me for the business of the business, it had given me formal training in classical theater, a nerdy penchant for interdisciplinary thought, and a minor in linguistic anthropology that would ultimately inform my career in surprising ways. By 2013, a decade into my acting career and 6 years into studying Buddhist philosophy, an interest in both right speech and the impact of language on society conspired to drastically alter my path. The lexicon of casting is highly codified and notoriously offensive. I found I could no longer continue quietly along as an actor when I saw how these words would inflict such pain on my community, and how they consequently influence those who consume the content we produce. I began collecting job descriptions for actors, breakdowns as they're referred to in the industry. What started as an angry habit of posting particularly offensive nuggets on social media to commiserate with my friends evolved into a larger online collection, a recurring performance at a reputable NYC venue, and a YouTube series that ultimately became a fully produced television show. My career shifted focus to social justice, exploring issues of representation and inclusion through the aperture of breakdown. Most recently, this work has found its way into my new practice of animation. The COVID-19 pandemic effectively froze the entertainment industry in its place. My TV show, The Greenlit for a New Season, was put on indefinite hiatus. Teaching and directing opportunities disappeared, and any potential for acting work was gone. Facing stories of creativity with no professional outlet and an abundance of unstructured time, I decided to try my hand at something I'd always loved watching: stop-motion animation. I figured if nothing else, it would fill a lot of hours. Since the beginning of quarantine, I had one rule for anything creative: don't be precious. I promised myself that I would trust in my process and allow discovery and failure to be part of the exhibited product I posted on social media. I christened my little videos extremely short films. I began with simply moving objects around my apartment and learning through problem solving. Eventually, I began playing with hand drawings, clay, paper cutouts, movable figurines, any medium or material I could get my hands on, or could any material I could get my hands on could whimsically come to life with the patience of tiny movements and hundreds of webcam photographs. But it was the deaths of Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, Tony McDade, Elijah McClain, and so many others, and the subsequent protests and actions that caused my new animation practice to collide with my new path of social justice through casting. In asking myself the question, how has my industry contributed to violence and unconscious bias, I returned to my collection of breakdowns, and my piece Representation Matters was born. Within a few days, the short video had gone viral, and over 840,000 times on Instagram it was viewed. I knew I had stumbled into rich territory and have focused predominantly on animation ever since. Though I continue to play with various forms for various purposes, so my videos are unabashedly silly, this seems to be the venue through which I can do the best social justice work. It both feeds my creative hunger and open venues through which I may be of service. For those reasons, animation will remain the stronghold of my path for the foreseeable future. We welcome the work and wisdom of Lynne Marie Rosenberg, and let's check out a little bit of what they have going on.
I have this theory that if everyone in the world woke up suddenly comfortable with themselves, that the stock market would crash. If everyone was just at peace, consumption would drop so significantly that we would just lose our entire economy. I mean, I think ultimately the basis of consumer culture is to make people not feel normal. Because as long as you feel like you haven't achieved it, you'll keep consuming.
When I was a kid, I was really focused on being normal. I was very clearly gay. I look back on that now and think, oh yeah, that was me just being me. But the need to be normal meant the need to be accepted. And to be accepted meant to not be questioned by anybody. And as I got older, I figured out how to dress normal, how to walk normal, how to behave normal, so that I never had a double take from another person. And in a lot of ways, my speech really sort of gave myself away. And it's a thing that I still struggle with, trying to figure out, like, what does it mean to sound normal? What does it mean to sound effeminate? What does it mean to be lispy and to have a sibilant S when I speak? That's what I think about when I think about normal.
And I want normal to be that I wake up and get dressed and work out and very productive, and I'm living my life like I'm a wild artist lady. But sometimes that's not what normal is. In fact, my therapist and I are discussing a lot lately how normal for me needs to be a little less pink and a little less pretty. And I haven't failed if normal isn't pretty. But do you ever feel sometimes like during quarantine, because like you have a roof over your head and maybe my parents love me, I should just be okay. But sometimes like life is like really not okay, and I think normal is a lot to ask for right now.
Normal. normal. Normal, I guess, is just a way, an acceptable way, a way of least resistance. I don't know, normal. What does that mean?
The most clearly I dealt with the pain of normal as a child was the height weight percentile chart that my childhood pediatrician insisted on showing me my position on every time I had my physical. And I have this really visceral memory of the red line that defined the fact that I was in what he had called the 90th percentile of weight versus height. I don't know, I get really mad when I think about how much suffering my poor little kid self had to go through when it came to the definitions of what normal meant and what she was not.
Like in books, like they go like, oh, Henry's just a normal 12-year-old boy. And then like when I was younger, like 8, I would say, oh, okay, like I imagine like the white suburban child with like brown hair riding a bike in like some suburban area. Like that's like what I imagine. Then if you imagine that, then like are you calling someone who's not white not normal?
I am a writer as well as a performer. So for me, words are really important, and I am not a fan in killing a word or declaring it dead or in some ways banning it, because I think we do not kill an idea just by taking away a word. It reminds me so much of the Jim Casey quote from Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck. I'm not going to get it exactly right, but it's always stayed with me, and it stayed with me in this way. Beware the day when the bombs stop falling, but the bombers yet live. And to me, that has always meant just because you take away a thing, a word, for instance, it doesn't mean you take away the idea or the impulse behind that. And in fact, I think it's dangerous to ban a word like that or to kill it. I think it leaves the power, the negative power of it out in the world, but in a way that you can't see as easily. I think better to dispel it, to bring it out into the light, to look at it, and to allow its power to dissipate. But I'm a writer, and so I have very strong opinions about words, and I think they are incredibly flawed
I don't know.
tools
I
to
hope
say
there is a way
what
to
we
do
feel
it.
and think.
That you show so many
Is
people
weird
and so
talking to
many
people.
different bodies and so many different ways of being human that no normal is established. That you sort of blow normal apart into a million different pieces. I don't know. I don't know if there's a way to do that. I hope there is. That's what I've dedicated my career to trying to break normal apart into a million different pieces so that there are so many pieces, there's no way to get back to a whole.
And those are some extremely short films. I actually cut it off before it. Hold on, I'm going back. I'm going to share screen. I just realized I left off the credits there. I'm gonna go mess up and do that. There we go. Now we're back. Thank you to Lynne and all of the artists that she worked with for those pieces. My favorite things that I wanted to shout out that were really interesting to me was the idea of normal being the path of least resistance. I thought that that was really powerful. Also, in the last one about killing the word doesn't kill the idea behind it, which is great and such an interesting thing. And one of the things I have always thought about this museum and what we built is words, they don't help us let go of the things that we need to let go of, but they create things that we didn't know existed. Oftentimes, there weren't boxes until we built words like box to let us know that we are in a thing. Sometimes those are useful because we need to know if there's a wall that we're going to bump into, and sometimes they're not because they're imaginary, they're metaphorical, and they're really not stopping us except for the words that do that. Now, I'd like to move into the conversation that Lynne and I had. This one is pre-recorded, but feel free to share any of these thoughts and ideas in the chat or ask questions. I'm going to be around and we'll be here to answer all the things that we got going for you. Let me share the screen of that video that we have going on, and we'll talk to you in a minute.
All right, with like
Right.
because we sort of have eye contact, like, because I get to look at your eyes and you get to look at my eyes, but it's not the same look that we're having.
Right. Well, I'm really curious because I think I'm interested in like all the scholarship that's going to happen about like serotonin levels and in terms of the kids right now who are growing up where looking at people and interacting with people means looking at a screen as opposed to the actual physiological reaction you have when you're with someone. And so like what is normal going to be for a child who grows up during this time and then hopefully shifts back into human interaction? Like, are they just going to be so overwhelmed by the amount of serotonin that they're getting hit with all the time?
But you talk about the change of like what's considered normal. My mom was alive when TVs weren't prevalent.
Right.
It's like just in a couple of generations, we go from it being something only the rich have access to being completely ubiquitous. And we're not only watching shows, but we're interacting with our friends. We're taking our classes now.
Yeah.
And like, I think that I remember like the 90s, early 2000s when video games were becoming a thing that were ubiquitous. Everyone was having access to them. And older people were like, oh, this isn't normal. Just go out and play. You shouldn't be looking at these things or making friends with these things. Movies would come out about how weird it was to have a friend that's a robot.
Yep. I know. Well, and I mentor a 13-year-old who's one of the voices in one of my videos. And I try to explain to her that in the 80s, what we're doing right now was sci-fi movie stuff. Like, we would joke about the fact that someday there would be video calls. It was like a funny joke. Like, oh yeah, I'll pick up the phone, I'll be able to see your face. And now it's like our entire lives. Her whole school is video calls.
I remember when I saw, what was it, like Spaceballs or something, where it's like a video call in the bathroom. And I remember thinking and being like, I don't want video calls. I'm gonna have to be presentable all the time and have my stuff together. And like even now, I'm like, video.
Yeah.
Oh,
I know.
me.
I have to remember to turn the video off if I do something that shouldn't be seen.
But there is something about the video calls that is comfortable. There's like another meaning of normal is comfortable.
Yeah.
Us theater heads, there's something not TV about it. And I know we can't look each other in the eye, but I think the fact that we're getting real-time response is a lot more of a big deal. I think even when I performed on Instagram Live, being able to see the little hearts fly up and I think it's less about the presence and it's more about the rhythm.
Yeah.
Right? I make a call, I get a response, it must be real. Like that's the Turing test for me. It's like, can I get something that I bounce off in real time? Which is funny because like video games were doing that for kids before it was becoming like everything we were doing up here was. It kind of like primed folks for it.
Yeah, it's interesting to me though. I last 2 weekends ago, I saw my first live performance in like 8 months. There was this like very socially distanced concert I went to that my friend was in. And I caught myself looking at my phone during it because I was like so far away, no one could see me. And I was like, I would never in a theater before this, look at my phone. But now I'm so used to like, while I'm on a big meeting, like I can be doing any other thing that I want to be doing. While I'm watching a Zoom play, I can be, you know, playing my stupid video game. Like the like how quickly my ability to just be present with performance went away is scary to me.
Well, but because it means different things, though, right? Now, for at least a decade now, folks have been curating this second screen experience thing. And for even longer before that, they were telling us the myth of being able to multitask, right? So we have this idea in our head that we multitask, and that's a good thing. It's a work thing. And then we add that to the curated second screen experience, and I see that as a natural progression. I actually think that it's cool because it's a way of taking the fidgetiness and making us present, as long as the fidgetiness is related to it. Hey, by the way, if you checked in, this is Dyalekt here. We're in our Museum of Dead Words. We're talking with the artist. We have here Lynne Marie Rosenberg, who did a piece on the word normal. So I just wanted to, we were just kind of talking our stuff as we got started. It was good to do that, but we should talk about you.
My favorite topic.
Just talking about you. It's kind of the artist side. We don't like talking about us. We like the work should speak for itself.
Oh no, I love talking about myself.
Okay, good. Then you're not even playing.
No, it's funny. I always felt that way as an actor too. It's weird to talk about in the past tense. We've talked about this. I'm in a very transitional point right now in terms of like even using the term actor for myself. But I always like fell into that camp of acting of like, no, I'm just playing myself, but whatever has arisen from these particular words of myself into this. I've never been one who's like, I go completely into the character. I'm like, no, it's just me. So like, if you're interested in me, you'll watch the shit. And if you're not, you won't.
That's how, when someone explained the whole thing of like method acting to me, that's the way that they explained it. So I ended up like having a different perspective on method acting from other people. And they were like, yeah, you don't pour yourself into the character. The dangerous and scary thing that makes it art and makes it like you being vulnerable is you take the character into you. I remember I did some acting when I was just finished high school, and I did this prison play where I had to do all this terrible kind of stuff and violence and all these things. And I was asking the guys I was working with, I was like, how do I figure out how to, like, I can't condone the stuff that these people do. And they said, no, you don't have to condone it. You don't have to even understand why they would do. You just have to understand how they would feel. And then once you got that on your own, then, you can go and say the words and do the stuff. Yeah.
That's a much better definition of that than I've ever heard. I feel like mostly people talk about like losing yourself and fully understanding the experience. I'm like, half the time I'm on stage, I'm thinking about my grocery list. I don't know. I don't take it that seriously. But that's fair. I think how they would feel is a much richer, more fundamental way of looking at it.
So let's get rich and fundamental in talking about you.
Yeah.
So let's talk about so you're sort of actor, you're not super comfortable. And then what we did here was some amazing stop motion animation stuff where there were other things moving, and for the most part, not even you being the one talking, and that talking seemed unscripted and was, just asking the people. So tell me a little bit about, your creative background. Feel free to tell me about other mediums that you haven't even told me about. And then how did we get to here where you make these kinds of creations?
Yeah, so I've been an actor for years, and in like 2013, 2014, I kind of hit a point where I was really fed up with the offensive casting notices I was seeing all the time. And of course, I'm a cisgender, able-bodied, straight, white, and neurotypical woman. So the only demographic that I was seeing was from there. But because I'm a woman, I was seeing incredibly offensive, they're all offensive, but in either ways in which I was being described or I was being excluded. So you start to learn what words do and do not apply to you or your type or whatever it is. And I just hit a point where I was angry all the time. And I first started posting mostly just white lady breakdowns because that's what I was seeing in my own employment. And then I started digging and looking at all the various demographics, offensive casting notices and exclusions and omissions. And I created this Tumblr that now is like hundreds of pages long of real offensive casting notices. That turned into a live show I was doing at Joe's Pub. That turned into a television show that I now have on New York's PBS affiliate. So this sort of like sent me down this whole path of social advocacy or inclusion advocacy. And I'm like, it was like trying to do that and then also walk the walk of being an actor as well, but just getting so angry and so disappointed actually with an art form that I really believe in. I really believe that representation has, because we are a ubiquitous entity, because everyone consumes media, we have the chance to do some of the most good in the world, and instead what we currently do is some of the most harm. And so it was like trying to be an actor and keep being an actor and also doing all this advocacy. Somewhere around 2016, 2017, 2018, really started to fight at each other. So I have this TV show, which is wonderful, and it's a you know, in some ways a dream come true. I host and write a television show where I interview people and I have them read offensive casting notices, and we use that to talk about representation and inclusion. I wouldn't necessarily say that it is artistically fulfilling. It's a wonderful, intellectually fulfilling, activism fulfilling role. But there's kind of been this thing missing where like I wasn't really making art necessarily. And then quarantine hit. And I suddenly had tons and tons of time on my hands because I had no employment and a creative drive. And so I've always loved animation. I'm like obsessed with animation of all kinds. And a friend of mine, for a musical I was supposed to do, it was like the first musical I was going to do in years, which of course got canceled because of COVID. Thank you, COVID. But he, right before everything shut down, had made this beautiful little cute 5-second stop motion video to promo the musical. And I was watching it and I was like, I can do that. I think I can do that. I should try doing that. And then in late March, I made my first little video of just my little drawing model, like walking basically. And I was so enamored of the fact that I could take like 40 pictures and turn it into something. And then I started experimenting with clay, I started experimenting with drawings, I started experimenting with words. And then all of the horrible police violence occurred in May. And that's when I said, how do I take these offensive casting notices and this aperture into the problems in representation, specifically through the language window of breakdowns. How do I do something with that, with this new skill set I'm developing of stop motion? And I made this video of the casting notices for white actors and the casting notices versus black actors. And it's very clear the words that are used for a certain set of people versus another set of people. And that went viral. And it was at that point that I was like, oh, maybe this is my new path. Like maybe sort of figuring out ways to use the wonder and just sort of sweetness of animation to address the social advocacy things that I'm trying to address. That was a long answer.
I know, that was great though. I feel you. Yeah, no, the wonder, like the thing of a child when they're like, well, but I knew what basics are, we know what black and white and red and all these things are and what they mean, but what's the deal with this? Why can't you paint it? Like what's that the internet thing? Explain it to me like I'm 5.
Yeah.
Right? Because if you can't, then you can't make it clear. So I hate that.
Yeah, I think there's, and we've talked about this before, but I think there's something about just things moving across the screen that shouldn't be able to move by themselves, whether it's words or clay or whatever I'm using as my medium, that just sort of cracks you open in this way to receive whatever the information is in a very different way than if I just wrote about it, which I've done, or if I just did an interview show about it, which I've done. There's something different that happens when things are animated. I don't know why.
Well, I mean, it's part of the stuff that we discuss here in the museum, right? These words aren't always enough. And we confuse them with being enough because words are the things that sit at the outset. They're the descriptor. They're the one that give the nuance and the details in a lot of ways that we understand intellectually, but we may not understand viscerally. It's why we will lay something out where the words connect to what we understand, but it doesn't necessarily connect with everyone else. And I think that's where we don't always get that great art connection. We were talking before the cameras came on about how the eye contact and that connection, that being there together thing is what makes it feel like art. So it's really interesting. So you went from doing your art thing, acting, and then hitting the walls of not liking the industry of what was going on, specifically what people were doing with words, which led to you just, I'm going to lay them bare, I'm going to expose them and see what's going on with that. And that didn't feel artistic to you. That didn't feel like you were able to share it, and so you were able to bring some other aspect, some other part of your creativity to it.
It is, I suppose it was artistic in a certain way. I guess because animation has brought me back to a tactile crafting.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's exactly what you're talking about, where I've been living in a world of words, in terms of having an interview show, hosting a live show. These are all word mediums. Even if I'm animating something with literal words, there is something happening there that involves my hands and the part of me that is beyond words, I guess, that isn't part of words. There's this tree outside my parents' house that I feel bananas even saying this out loud, but I feel like she summoned me here to save her because she was on death row. A lawn care guy had told my parents that it should go and that it was dead. And I got here in June and I was like, this tree is not dead. This tree is alive. And I have to be the one that gets a second opinion, apparently, because I refuse to let this tree go. I have no idea why I was so impassioned about this tree. And I was right. We got a second opinion, and the arborist said, like, it's alive and it needs some serious pruning, but it should stay. And I really feel like there's some communication that occurred that has nothing to do with words, that somehow I arrived and made sure that this tree was not taken down in one swift day.
Yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. But when we talked about, the slowdown or great pause that we've had, and us stopping and listening more to a lot of things, like to rhythms of life, as my first producer's name, Rhythms of Life, because that's the things that kind of guide us and make things go around. And I think that one thing that all living things really have been able to understand is collective trauma, right? Because the whole thing about trauma, as we talk about like the rhythm of life, trauma is usually a physical thing. We get hit, there's a mark, there's some sort of reverberation so everybody knows about it. And we may use words to talk about it, but, and trauma is really difficult because of this word that we're talking about this week, because of normal, because we have an expectation about the way we should live our lives. Normal tends to mean regular, right? I believe Jessica in your piece was saying something about normal being a regular everyday thing. But what was funny about it is Jessica was having to accept her level of normal because she also had an expectation that normal meant the apex, living your best life was normal. Getting an A was normal all the time. Average is the best.
Right.
Yeah, that was something that was like really ill in there.
Yeah, I think I keep coming back to this idea, especially now that we're in a thing that we're calling not normal. I keep coming back to this idea that we talked about, that normal is actually just this collection of pleasant events that we thought we deserved or that we thought were going to continue. But actually they were just a series of pleasant events that kept happening, and maybe similar ones happened day to day, and now those pleasant events aren't occurring anymore. But we named it normal. We gave it the costume normal. And I think it's I think it's easy for me to call my life a series of pleasant events when in recent memory I've not gone through my own acute trauma. But that we create this idea of a thing that's supposed to be happening, and actually at any moment you wake up and it doesn't happen anymore. And it's rare that as a collective, as a world community, we have one of those experiences where we realize, oh, everything we thought we just deserved and happened every morning is no longer occurring.
Yeah, well, that takes a lot. It takes a lot for us to be able to sit there. It took a lot of time. Even like after the first couple of days, I don't think everybody was down until they really got in there and started getting these other ideas of what normal and then not normal really were. Because, you know, normal rarely means regular. It often means, like you're saying, like these series of pleasant events. We have trauma. We're taught to ignore the trauma or use it to make ourselves better, like make some story, especially us creatives, make some story out of the trauma that makes you the great thing. I know that was plenty of my first writings, where like we normalize the trauma and we make these things okay. And what's ill is it's this reversion to status quo that makes it such that it's then not okay to speak out about wanting change or to try to affect change. Like I want to share like a little bit in terms of like the acting story. You and I have talked about this privately, but I went into a similar situation around the same time as you. I even thought about making like a racist castings, and then like I copied like 2 or 3 days of it, and I was like, I don't want to do this. It's too much for my soul. But
It's horrible.
Stopped auditioning because I didn't like the way things were going, and like being a mixed cat, it's always been a weird proposition for me. Like you, I became a bit of a writer because I thought that they were telling the stories of my world, and I thought that would be enough. But funny enough, it wasn't, when it comes to normal, right? A lot of us take trauma as normal, and our amygdalas are always popping. And I think I'm one of those cats because I know I act a lot odder, weirder, less normal when I get praise and acceptance, because I'm often suspicious of where it comes from. And this has a lot to do with, being a light-skinned dude who often passes for white from a black family. Because I will so get something, some kind of accolades, some kind of thing in school, come back, my family would be like, well, why are they doing this? And they'd often be right. And so I remember when it was hard for me to get roles because they were like, so you're not exactly white, and are you Latino? Do you speak Spanish? And like they would offer me mostly Latino roles and things like that, and they didn't know where to place me and stuff. And they'd like, we'd love your read, but I don't. And then in the early mid 2010s, it changed, and suddenly I was getting to be in demand. They were really into this ethnically diverse face. Oh, we can have your face and it's light skin, but we can say we've got a black person on the cast and all this type of stuff. And it came to a head when I was brought in. I didn't remember. I would say the name, but it was like some big brand who wanted a rapper. And in the call sheet, it said rappers for this like popular clothing or shoe brand. I really honestly forget what it was. I would call them out. But it said no old school and no African Americans. I was like, that's a weird specific thing to say about rappers that you want for your brand. I sent them an email and I was like, hey, so what's up with that? Because I, fit your look, but I also am an African American. They're like, oh, please come in. We want you guys to come in. I came in, I was talking to them about this, and everybody was trying to pass the buck on it, and everybody there looked like they were there for an Abercrombie shoe. There wasn't Abercrombie, just trying to think about it.
Call it where it is.
When that happened, I was like, you know what? I don't want to be that guy. It reminded me of when amazing battle rapper Idea won this rap battle on HBO, and Puff Daddy tried to sign him because like Eminem was popular and he had just won a battle. And I remember he said something, maybe it was Invincible. He said like, I don't want to be the white person out here ruining hip hop because I love this kind of thing. And I think that people are trying to sign me for the wrong reasons.
Wow.
Like, and they're like, this guy signed Biggie, but it's like, I think they're trying to sign me for the wrong reasons. So like, wanting to cut themselves out of that. And I felt like the same kind of thing. It's like, yeah, what y'all trying to use me for, I don't think we should be a part of.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think when you hit that point, it's not hard to say no anymore, but we're disenfranchised as performers, and so saying no is like the thing you're never, ever, ever supposed to do.
Never.
And a lot of people asked me when I started collecting breakdowns or like actively posting them and actively reaching out to companies to change their language, they're like, aren't you worried you're going to get blacklisted? You know, you're going, and I guess in some ways, I kind of thought like, well, maybe I'm sabotaging my own career, but also it's like, there's something so much bigger happening here. Like, I don't want to be in the career that blacklists me because I'm fighting for something else, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like, if it's going to blacklist me, then I don't want to be part of that.
Wow.
And I often joke, like, at this point, the only things I want to be in is the stuff that's written by my Black, Indigenous, people of color, trans, non-binary, and disabled friends. Like, they can put me in their shit, and that's when I'll work, and that's all when I need to work, because otherwise, I don't want to participate in this.
I love this. Be hungry but not thirsty. You know, a thing that
Ooh, I love that.
Right.
Yeah.
Not desperate about it, but like, I'm always down to do stuff. I really love what you're saying, because I like to say that, you can't fake it till you make it, because then once you've made it, you're fake, and you got to remain to be. We only have a couple minutes left, and I want to talk about a couple of things real quick. There were a couple of different ideas of normal that came about in your piece. We were talking before about the apex and the regular, but some other interesting ones, like from Alex, we got acceptable.
Yeah.
The word acceptable. And then we got a different type of acceptable from Keith. And the acceptable from Alex was acceptable, meaning I'll get a gold star for it. And from Keith, it was more of an anonymity, like I would not be questioned. No double takes. And then said specifically not feminine was normal, which implied to me the idea of normal being the majority, which also lined up with Sarah, who talked about suburban. It used the word suburban twice, and then asked, is the idea that someone who is not white, not normal? So like the idea of white and normal all implied in suburban. And in a lot of cases, what that boiled down to was meaning safe. And it seems like it vacillates between living your best life, safe, and anonymous.
Oh, yeah. I love that word anonymous. I never thought about Keats in that regard, but that is exactly what it is how do I just blend in? How do I make normal the way that I blend in? I think in some ways, I think that safe concept or the majority concept fits right into what we're talking about representation, is that if you have a media that says that cis het white male, able-bodied, neurotypical, symmetrical and fit and relatively young and lean bodied, that we have defined that as normal, and that anything that takes you away from that core center sends you further and further into the fringe, so that you have more and more you have to fight to get back for.
Ooh, more and more into the fringe, so you gotta shout louder and louder because less people are able to hear you.
That's right. And I think the one animation I haven't finished yet, that I'm finishing this week, is me talking about how what I've dedicated my career to, I think, is how do we explode the word normal into a million pieces such that you see so many bodies on the screen, you see so many neurodiversities on a screen, you see so many ways of being human, that there is no centralized normal anymore. I think that is the grand noble potential of the entertainment industry, is exploding normal open, so that it is not even remotely surprising to see a sitcom with 3 disabled people and a mixed race couple and whatever the mixed demographic is that you start to show so many bodies and so many humanities that there's no longer a core normal you can even touch.
I love that. And, that makes me think a lot about the commerce part of it. Because if capitalism was just a thing that rolled on and worked the way it should, the thing that we need to do is fill all the niches, right?
Yeah.
And by filling all the niches, it would be the smartest thing to create all of the art that does absolutely everything rather than following the model of success. to bring us back to, I want to wrap up here with the talk about the idea of the suburbs, right? And the suburbs being normal, and the suburbs being not just normal, they're not average, they're successful, they have a lot of wealth. And that often comes, a lot of the suburbs were built, and the reason why there are a lot of white folks in the suburbs is the Homestead Act. Folks were just given stuff. And what was normal then, to be given stuff to build a middle class, then became, well, you can't just be given stuff because you're lazy. What's funny is it's the same people who were told that they were already lazy. And it's normal to be told that those people are lazy. So it's normal to call the cops when you see them in your neighborhood, even though they now have built up enough money that they can afford to be there.
That's right. I keep thinking about what you said, that people start to feel that the thing that is normal was also natural, that it just naturally occurred, and that we feel like a suburb is just a thing that's supposed to exist. And I'm someone who grew up in one and is in one right now. And it's really shifted how I've looked at, and obviously these are things I'm steeped in already, these kinds of conversations, but I never quite applied it to suburbs in that way, of that, like, you just think of them as natural. They were naturally occurring beasts that arose from the ashes.
Ooh, naturally occurring, curating communities.
Yep.
So we explode normal. I want to end on this with you. So if we're going to explode normal and break it up into all of these million pieces, where do we go from there? Do we need to find a new word? Do we need to just pick one of these definitions of normal, or do we need to let go of the concept entirely?
Well, I think a friend of mine, and this is the one video I haven't shot yet, he references the quote from, I can't remember what play it is, but the quote is vaguely, beware when the bombs cease, but the bombers yet live. And so if you just took the word away, or just took, if you just took the word away, what still remains potentially is the central idea of normalcy, of again, in our culture, and I can only speak to our culture: cisgender, able-bodied, straight, white, heterosexual, neurotypical, symmetrical, small-bodied.
And yet, worth it to be that specific. I know it takes longer.
I know, but I think it is, because the more you start to think about that, the more you realize how much you're seeing it in media, whether that be print or books or film and television and theater. So I would hesitate to remove it, but rather, as my friend says in this video, bring it into the light. Is that I think it would be a recurring, I think there's a human tendency to want to believe there is an ideal. And so you would have to continually explode the thing. You have to keep making sure you have not landed on a new device of trauma, basically.
That makes a lot of sense. And it wraps around the thing that I said in the song, Mediocrity, where we talk about word normal, we got to keep exploding and keep pushing the edge.
Yeah.
When we push the edge, the center moves too. And that's the way that we change normal, by changing the entire parameters.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. Push the edge, the center moves too. That's beautiful.
Thank you. Your work is beautiful. Thank you for sharing and being a part of the museum. We really appreciate this.
Thank you. It's been an absolute honor. And I will say, so your application was the first one that I decided to sort of put my work toward and say, like, do I have a thing? And the validation of being accepted into something like this was like, yeah, you have a thing. So it's really been an honor to be here.
So, you don't know if you have a thing, then you have a thing, then you get another thing, and now it's normal to have stuff.
And now it's normal, and now I got to explode my normal again.
Time, every day. Thank you so much.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Right. That was our perspective on normal, the epitome of silence equaling violence. Check in with Kristen on Sunday for her epitaphs, and next week our word will be sexist/sexism, and how if the normalization of discrimination is killing the voice of the marginalized, what do you call it when not just the voice, but but the words, the face, and the body attached are under non-metaphorical attack. Peace, y'all.